Well, good day. I got a pretty interesting podcast here for me. So, let's get at her. So, good morning. Today, it's Boomers versus Gen Z, or Gen Z, depending on where you are. The 60s reborn, but our grammar's lost. And so, welcome to the podcast where we're going to tackle big ideas that are shaking up our world from the past, right now, today. We're diving into a generational brawl that feels like it's straight out of the history books. The 60s, boomers, with their peace signs and protests, took on their parents' stiff, suit and tie world. Fast forward to 2025, and it's millennials and Gen Z going head to head with those same boomers, now running the show. It's history reborn, but here's the rub. Our grammar, the way we speak, connect, and live is lost. From crushing rents to a planet on fire, this isn't just a fight for ideals. It's a struggle to be heard. So grab a seat as we unpack why this clash makes the 60s look tame and what it means for us. All right, so to kick off, here's a story. This one is mine. It's going to be a little messy because even after throwing it at AI a half dozen times, it just doesn't seem to understand this personal anecdote. So what I'm going to get at is what I called code switching. Okay. One of my favorite philosophers, communication theorist by the name of Marshall McLuhan, great Canadian, he explained this idea simply, this generational disconnect, as one generation struggling to understand the grammar of another generation. But I argue that he never thought, like he was arguing if we had multiple generations struggling to understand each other's grammar, that would make this disconnect. And this is how he defined the 60s, right? Because you had these generations struggling to understand each other. But what I don't think he saw would be that some of these generations would struggle to understand their own grammar, right? So we have multiple generations that don't understand each other, and some of these generations don't even understand themselves. And so I argue that the sad truth is they have left the Gen X out of the whole equation when we've been raised to be an intermediary between these generations. I go one step further and I argue that each one of these generations, the silent generation or the greatest generation, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, they all have within them different segments, right? Because the argument I use is I'm right in the middle. I'm a Gen Xer. My brother was born near the beginning of that period, and he's much closer to a boomer. I mean, if you met him, you definitely see him as a boomer. But at the same time, he's not. He's like a proto Gen X, right? He doesn't have all the qualities that I have, but he definitely doesn't have all the qualities of a boomer. But the same can be said for my mother, who was born right at the end of the Second World War, right? She was super old when I was born, which made her part of that silent generation, but she was 100% part of the boomer generation. But at the same time, my father, born the exact same year, was 100% old school silent generation, disgusted by hippies, and my mom thought it was cool, completely all over the map, right? So I don't think I was alone in this, that we, had different ranges and we learned to understand each other's grammar. But that was a different time when we weren't so insular. So I mentioned McLuhan, I mentioned the boomers, I mentioned how we would struggle to understand each other's grammar. I mentioned how we've oversimplified it, and by ignoring these sub-generations, this is what's led to this disconnect, this misunderstanding. I used an example of leaving out the Gen X is similar to leaving out the neurodiverse. These voices can act as translators, but they can also give us a window into a world that we may be blind to, right? And then a starter it gave me was, as a Gen Xer, I've always felt like I'm on the outside looking in, caught between boomers and Gen Z. So I said I always felt like I was on the outside looking in. And of course, the title of the episode is about boomers and Gen Z, but when I was prompting, I just said, we're just going to use this for, for clickbait sort of idea in the sense that we are going to discuss intergenerational. We're not just talking about the boomers and the Gen Z, but we are talking about how even 70 years after the fact, this dynamic hasn't changed all that much, right? So I proceed with the rest of the episode. I apologize for being a little all over the ball there, but personal stories. Welcome to my mess. So that story is not just mine. It's a glimpse into a deeper break, one that Marshall McLuhan saw coming but didn't fully get. He said each generation's got its own grammar, its way of speaking, thinking, living, and they struggle to understand each other. Boomers had their stoic action-first vibe. Gen Z's got memes and therapy talk. But here's where McLuhan missed it. It's not just about generations clashing. Each generation is struggling to understand its own grammar. Why? We've flattened history, ignoring the sub-generations, early boomers versus late, early Gen Z versus younger. And when we sideline voices like Gen X, the neurodiverse, or anyone in between, we lose the translators, the intermediaries, the code switchers, those who can bridge the gap. That's where this fight started. And it is why it's messier than in the 60s. So let's set the 1960s stage. Boomers were young, loud, and fed up. Their parents, the greatest generation, survived the Depression, won World War II, and built a world of picket fences and punch card jobs. To boomers, it was a cage, too stiff, too conformist. They wanted free love, civil rights, no Vietnam. And they had numbers, a demographic tidal wave. When they hit Woodstock or marched on Washington, the world listened. They were united, and they knew they'd take over soon. Now in 2025, millennials and Gen Z are the rebels fighting for climate action, economic fairness, and a world that doesn't feel doomed. Their target? Boomers, now in their 60s and 70s, holding court in Congress, corner offices, and power. Like the 60s, the young feel ignored, locked out, ready to shake things up. But unlike the greatest generation, who were aging out, boomers aren't budging. They're 20% of the population, but they hold the keys. Wealth, influence, a system wired for them. Let's break down why this clash is tougher, starting with the economy. In the 60s, boomers rebelled in a golden age. A house cost $20,000, about $200,000 today. One paycheck covered a mortgage, groceries, a car. Boomers could drop out, join a commune, and still make it. Their fight was culture, not survival. Today, it's brutal. Median house price in 2025, $420,000. Wages for under 40s haven't moved in decades. Student debts, $1.7 trillion. Millennials and Gen Z aren't just protesting, they're scraping by. Boomer policies get the blame. In the 80s and the 90s, as boomers took charge, they pushed tax cuts and deregulation that juiced their wealth. Now, boomers hold over half of America's wealth, $80 trillion, while Gen Z hustles gigs and splits rent. On X, #boomers versus Gen Z calls out boomer landlords for gatekeeping the dream. In the 60s, boomers had hope. Today's youth feel betrayed. Strike one. The economic grammar's lost. So strike two, power. In the 60s, the greatest generation were a majority, but fading. Leaders like Lyndon Johnson were in their 60s, passing the torch. Boomers with numbers knew they'd inherit. Today, boomers are 20% of the population, but they're not letting go. Joe Biden's 82. Average senators near 65. Boomers run corporate boards. 60% of Fortune 500 CEOs are over 60. They're a minority with a majority control, thanks to wealth, gerrymandering, and an electoral college amplifying their rural base. Millennials and Gen Z, 40% of the population, can't break through. In 2024, Gen Z voted at 40%, boomers at 70%. Yet policies favor Social Security over debt relief. On X, memes like boomers won't retire are spiking in 2025. It's not a gap, it's a lockout. In the 60s, boomers waited their turn. Today's youth are trapped. The grammar of power is lost. So strike three, the stakes. In the 60s, Vietnam was fire. Young men drafted to die for a war they didn't buy. Protests like the 1969 moratorium drew millions, fueled by Dylan and Baez. Vietnam was one fight and it ended. Today, climate change, it's not one war, it's the war. Gen Z's marching with Fridays for Future, shouting like their lives depend on it because, well, they do. Global temps are up since pre-industrial times, but it depends on the numbers you look at. Wildfires are up. Most of it is human-caused. Floods, heat waves. They're the new draft. They're the new existential crisis imposed on the younger generation to keep them distracted, in my opinion. Without some of these causes, they might actually get together and deal with some of these real societal issues that are causing issues. And then maybe we could get together and deal with our climate change, our global warming, whatever you want to call it. Having grown up on a farm, I can tell you, I have heard way too many people who try to decry the planet, but with two EV vehicles that weigh twice that of a gas vehicle in the driveway that they replace every 3 years, as opposed to a gas vehicle that can last for generations. I've come to rethink their priorities, but I digress and I proceed. Boomer-led systems often block the way. Many of these in their 70s stall on progress. Boomer-heavy corporate boards, they push this greenwash while emissions climb. On X, boomers versus Gen Z slam, boomers torching the planet, but in reality, what they're funding is actually causing most of our trouble, never mind dividing us. Unlike Vietnam, our planet is a ticking clock, and the young feel they're inheriting a broken world. The 60s had urgency, 2025 has existential dread. The grammar of survival's lost. Well, AI is falling for this construct. And I've gone through it again. Here's how I can translate. They told us CFCs were destroying the world and the ozone layer, and they told us about glaciers, but they won't talk about that the glaciers are coming back or the coral reefs are coming back. There is a lot that we should be concentrating on, but when these elites are been shown that what they thought to be true is wrong, they don't reorder their priorities. They keep pushing. Right? That's my concern. Right? For years, why wouldn't we be looking at lower displacement, smaller little maybe diesel engines? But welcome to Canada, where there's a 100% tariff on Chinese vehicles. Why? Well, because they're banned from being imported. But say if you wanted to be so environmental that you wanted to import them on your own, well, you're going to pay twice what they're actually being sold for. It's completely not to protect industry, because we don't have an EV industry here in Canada, right? They were pushing us all to go to emissionless free by 2035, but we weren't allowed to bring in any vehicles. All right, remember, this is coming from the guy. My first vehicle was a 1987 Suzuki Forza. I thought the future would be these small displacement engines. It was a 5-speed, 3-cylinder gas engine, but I got 900 kilometers to a tank. That was mind-boggling at the time. Right? That would secure our future. Or when I moved to the South, I couldn't get around by city bus. I had no ability to get to and from. The place where I work actually ran their own charter buses because the city buses were so bad. Fast forward 20 years, 25 years, no difference, right? Because over the last 20, 25 years, I have used the bus off and on, and it is no better. In fact, what's sad, I live in a town that gets millions of visitors a year, and the bus service is worse than the town I came from in the middle of northern Ontario with I don't know what we had at the time, 40,000 people tops, and that's including all the outskirts. We had better bus service. I was able to go to work. At one point I had 3 jobs. Then I was going to school and I had 2 jobs. I went to high school on the city bus. I went to college on the city bus. I worked for years to and from. I did a lot of walking as well, but it blew my mind to come to southern Ontario where they claim to be environmental and friendly and no composting to be found. Still, 25 years I've been living in the South and I still don't see people composting. Right? Not to mention the lies that were our recycling industry. And I've seen people just give up on even recycling paper products now because they feel so had. And it's not their fault. We discovered this in the mid-2000s that if you bait and switch someone, giving them what you promised them isn't enough, right? So in this case, we were lied to about plastics. And the reason why I'm upset is, well, why don't we listen to Japan? You know what they do? You can't get away from plastic in this world because you're going to destroy trees. And they know they can't do this, right? Because they own most of our trees. And yet even they realize it would be too expensive to do that. So what do? They burn their plastic for energy. Emissionless. But here in Canada, we shipped it off to a third world country to have them just dump it in their dump. And what did that do? That just turned everybody off of this, green initiative, real green initiatives. Right? But our politicians are putting billions of dollars into fake. There is actually people burying trees because they believe that allowing trees to grow will contribute to global warming and the environment. Yes, trees produce carbon dioxide, but they also produce so many other things. Same as cows, right? They want to get rid of cows, but honestly, when they actually look at the data entirely, they're actually beneficial in the long run. But as I watched a video just the other night, it's kind of like with archaeology, right? They will ignore all the carbon dating of ancient sites and make up some sort of fanciful idea. The example I might give is, you know how archaeology explains away the very distinctive circular anchors off the coast of South America? Very distinctive because they really look like Chinese. Right? And we have other evidence, but we won't go into that. Let's just talk about the anchors. So what are all these obviously man-made? For a long time they just said, oh no, that just happened, by accident. It's natural. But now we know it's definitely not. So how do they explain it away? Well, they will say that it wasn't Chinese people from China, but it was Chinese immigrants, right? So of course, somebody who emigrates from China knows all about sailing in China and 100% familiar with the anchors they used, but neither here nor there. So they used traditional anchors, and of course they weren't influenced at all by the Americans, who would have had completely different ideas of what an anchor would be, because I love the Chinese idea of the anchor, but it's not as efficient as it could be if they had access. Oh, you mean like iron and stuff at this time? Yeah. So they were a good choice when, you weren't going to waste all that iron on an anchor. So you use a stone. But no, ignore all that. So it's modern era, 1800s. Chinese immigrants are using the old school technology for the anchors because they wanted to go fishing. This is the excuse. The reason why we have all these anchors off the coast. They weren't Chinese, came over from China. They were Chinese immigrants in California. And they built their own boats. Redwood junks is what they said. No evidence whatsoever in history, no documentation at all of a redwood junk being made, but that is the excuse. And they avoided the rich fishing waters off the coast of San Francisco to go further south. It just boggles the mind. But we've seen this. This is Dunning-Kruger again. Some of our most stubbornly ignorant people are our most educated because they've been taught to believe that they know best, right? But as Bruce Lee said, you must keep in mind, right? It's Greek, epike. You must keep in mind that no matter how good you are, there could be somebody who could best you, right? So, and I digress, I apologize, but I think it makes the point, right? But let me pause. What's your take? Are you a Gen Z? Are you feeling this weight? Are you a boomer with a different view? Maybe you're a Gen Xer like me, translating between them or just on the outside laughing. Drop a post with boomer versus Gen Z or grammar lost, hashtag grammar lost. And I'll definitely shout you out on the next episode. This isn't just history, it's our story. And I want your voice, right? This is why my podcast is Almighty Own, because I'm not coming from a place of being an expert in anything except my own perspectival knowing, my own experience, my own place. That's it, right? So, culture. Culture's the kicker. The 60s counterculture was tight. Boomers grooved at Woodstock, watched Cronkite, sang the same songs. The rebellion had a pulse. It was organic. Today, we're fractured. Boomers are on Fox or Facebook, Gen Z on TikTok, X on Discord. Algorithms feed us different worlds. X's hashtag boomer logic roasts older takes on crypto or pronouns. Boomer posts gripe about woke kids. We're not on the same stage. And I think that's by design. Gen Z is diverse, racially, ideologically, globally. That's power, but it scatters their energy. Boomers had unity. Today's youth juggle 100 fights, climate, race, economy, tech. It's hard to rally when your revolution's drowned out by algorithms and so often mostly smoke and mirrors. The 60s had a megaphone. 2025 has 1 million group chats. The grammar of connections lost. Why is our grammar lost? Economically, boomers had opportunity. Today's youth have debt and despair. Politically, boomers were a majority waiting to win. Now they're a minority refusing to lose. Culturally, the 60s had unity. We've got echo chambers. The stakes. Vietnam was a tragedy. Climate change is doomsday. History's reborn. But boomers, once rebels, are now the empire, holding power with wealth and systems built to last. Millennials and Gen Z have numbers, but they're fighting a brutal war. A minority rule, a broken economy, a planet in flames, and a grammar that doesn't translate. So what's next? In the 60s, boomers took over as their parents faded. Millennials and Gen Z might, but it'll take time. Boomers are living longer, holding tight. Without shifts, electoral reform, wealth taxes, climate action. As example, there's many more important ones, but that would we put towards as something for Gen Z to jump on. I would argue there are other issues as well. Not wealth taxes. What's a good example? Well, if we didn't waste half our food in the West, we wouldn't have as much waste. If the government could do something that didn't cost 1/10 the price privately, that might be something. If they didn't use these excuses for a reason not to act, then maybe we could convince this younger generation that we could do something. But as it is, all we've seen is gridlock, right? We've seen unrest, tons of campaigns, but nothing but gridlock. So here's the hope. Gen Z's got global reach. They're linked from Seoul to Sao Paulo, organizing on X, TikTok, and beyond. They're diverse, creative. They're done waiting, but they need a new grammar, one that anchors their story, not just their pain. That's where code switchers like me, like Gen X, come in, translating, bridging, rebuilding. I would go further. They need to be taught how to think and how to be. Reading, thinking, writing, they're all one skill that develop the person wholly, and that's, I think, what's missing. The tragedy is we've sidelined those bridges, flattening sub-generations, ignoring the neurodiverse, which may have helped us teach each other and grow together. Ask yourself, are we doomed to loop history, or can we find a language that connects? So that's it for today. Did this hit you, or did it miss completely? You got a story about navigating this lost grammar? Hit X with Boomers versus Gen Z or hashtag Grammar Lost. And let's keep it rolling. Subscribe, share, and join us the next time for another idea that might hit hard. Until then, keep questioning, keep translating, keep building. This is Al from Almighty Om signing off. Thank you for your time.